So I just want to welcome everyone. Obviously, going through a polling conversation is not always the most exciting thing, but I want to give some background on the LIBRE Institute. We've been around 15 years. We're in 13 chapter states, and we are a 501c3. So a lot of C3s, they focus on charity work and other amazing things. Here at the LIBRE Institute, though, our goal is to empower Hispanics. And we do that by giving them the right tools that they need to succeed. And then in addition to that, we want to give all of you and some of our key coalition partners the right tools to help you make the right decisions, reach the Hispanic community. Our grassroots teams, they do a lot in their communities, everything from grassroots workshops on financial literacy to civics classes to talk about our founding principles. So this event is actually very timely with us celebrating America's 250. I see a lot of Hispanics in the room, but if you're not too familiar with our audience, you'll learn a little more today. And one of the main things is Hispanics care about freedom, opportunity, and a lot of the founding principles that we all know and love. And this data, Jim, our pollster, will go into it, but it's a poll we've done the last 4 years. So it's very interesting to see how the trend lines change with the Hispanic community, given the environment. So the way we'll do today is our pollster, Jim, will go through all the results in a very concise manner. You also have a handout. We'll do a brief Q&A. So, Jeffrey?
Yes. Yeah, so as Sandra was mentioning, this is what the agenda will be for the next 45 minutes. So we're going to go over the key findings. We're going to have an opportunity for question and answer. So if you have any questions during the presentation, you will be seeing a QR code throughout the presentation. Once we are done with the panel discussion, we're going to open it up for those questions. So with that, I'm going to move on to the next section, which is explaining about what this poll is. And so when I was thinking about what I was planning to write down as my talking points, I was thinking about that this is more than just data. To me, and for most of us, this is about our families and our communities, because this is not about someone else, this is about us. And so I was thinking about a question, and then the question that was coming to my mind was, do we really understand what our communities are feeling and what that means for the future? So that's a question that as we go through the poll data, I want us to keep in the back of our minds, because we're living through a pivotal moment right now in which the Latino community is at the center of it. You know, we're 65 million Latinos, we're voting Latinos, and we are contributing, we are building, and we're shaping what the American dream looks like. And increasingly, we're doing that at the ballot box now. And so we saw that in 2024 when we saw a larger Latino voter turnout. And there's one question that keeps coming to my mind is that there is an increase in growth, there's an increase in influence, but there was a gap. There was a gap in understanding what our communities are really thinking, and that's what this poll is doing, is we are trying to understand exactly what matters to our community. For the few of you that don't know who we are, our mission is very simple but powerful. We want to empower the Latino community because we believe when the community is informed, they're empowered. And when they're empowered, they're able to shape their own future and not have it shaped for them. And so as we look at the data, we're going to see that this poll was conducted for the last 4 years. We also have reached the Latino community across the country. So 13 of our chapter states and a few other states were included in this presentation. Something that you'll see throughout the data is there's a concern for economic uncertainty. There's also questions about healthcare and about opportunity. All of that is there. But also what shows that, through the data is resilience, is that optimism, is the belief in the American dream. And so that is the story that we want to cover. We still see a lot of our community that believe that hard work should lead to opportunity. And that's what makes this moment important, because what we're trying to do is listen to the needs of our community. We want to move forward with in a way that reflects those values. And so what we are taking away from this poll is we're trying to close the gap. We are trying to make sure that we elevate in the Latino community our voices, and we're trying to make sure that we helped not only be part of the conversation, but lead the conversation. So I'm glad that you're here. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jim to go over with the key findings.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Pleasure to be with you all. I've had the honor and privilege of conducting this survey for the last 4 years, and it really is interesting, and it shows some consistent trends. One thing that really stands out is even though as we go through this, we will see some data that shows some pessimism, especially on the economy. One thing that really shines through is the Hispanic community is still very much a believer in freedom and opportunity on a whole host of issues. So it was a survey of 1,200 voters nationally. Then we also did oversamples in a whole host of key states, not just Florida, Texas, and California, but we really dug into North Carolina, Georgia, places like that. And then I know there's some folks from the House Republican Conference here. I'll be looking at the national data, but if you say, hey, I've got a member in Florida who's curious about the data among Floridians, I've got a member in Texas who's curious about the data among Texans specifically, just let the folks at LIBRE know and they know where to find me. So political environment, mentioned the pessimism. Would you say things in the country are going in the right direction or pretty seriously gotten off on the wrong track? 24% right direction, 76% wrong track. And that cuts across age groups. And this is fairly similar to what we see with the electorate overall. One big takeaway, and I think this is one miscalculation. I was talking to some folks about this before we got started, is there's this perception of, it's hard to target Hispanics because you have to have a completely different message for Hispanics, and I've got to pay attention to swing voters, or I've got to pay attention to my base. That's really not the case. When we go through this data very consistently, Hispanic voters look a lot like the electorate as a whole, so the message you're carrying to the general electorate is a similar message you can take to Hispanics. Might be a different form of delivery, might be a little different tone, but it's not like you need two entirely separate strategies. One thing we see is that Hispanics aren't happy with either party, right? Republican approval is 26% approve, 74% disapprove. Democrats, 39% approve, 61% disapprove. Again, very similar to what we see in national data, right? Voters are not happy with either party right now. Getting into the issues. So they were asked to pick their top 2 issues. So 47% of Hispanic voters nationally had the economy and jobs as one of their top 2 issues. Inflation, 31%. So this is a very economically focused electorate. Other things are further down the list, right? Threats to American democracy, healthcare, taxes and spending. Look at immigration, right? Only 12% picked that as one of their top 2 issues. So this is very much an economically affordability, jobs-oriented electorate right now. Looking at the economy, like I said, there is some pessimism right now. 52% of voters say the current state of the economy is poor. 30% say fair. Only 18% say the economy is excellent or good right now. And perhaps even more concerningly, there's not a lot of trust that it's going to get better. 59% of Hispanic voters say it's going to get worse. Only, 22% say it's going to get better. Look at that difference. This is why it's helpful to have trend data, right? In 2023 and 2024, there was at least some optimism that, hey, it's at least going to stay about the same, right? I'm not wild about it, but it's not. I don't expect it to get too much worse. Now we're up at 59% get worse, only 19% saying stay about the same. Cost of living. I really like this question that we've started adding to surveys because you hear so much about, we need to focus on the cost of living. We need to focus on affordability. But what specifically are voters focused on? And here they named their top 3 concerns, and what they were is rent or mortgage, food and household items, and monthly utilities. So the way I think about these are the bills that you're paying every month, right? You pay your rent or mortgage every month. You go to the grocery store every week. You pay your monthly utility bill every month. Further down the list, out-of-pocket healthcare costs, gas, credit card payments. It's much more the things that show up. I used to always say the things that show up in your mailbox. Now it's more often in your email or via text message, but it's those types of concerns that voters are really looking to have addressed. And I want to pay particular attention to monthly utility bills because when we get into the energy section, that's where you see there's a lot of support among Hispanics for things that can help bring down the cost of energy. Freedom and opportunity. A free market is the best way to create an economy that works for all Americans. 71% agree, a little bit down from 79% in April of 2025, but still a clear majority agree that the free market is the best way. But here's where we see a little bit of a disconnect, right? Benefited from the free market because it grows the economy and allows any individual to succeed. That was 72% agree in April 2025. It's 52% now. So it's splitting voters down the middle. And where are we seeing that change? It's really among two key groups, right? Younger voters. It's important to note when I talk about younger voters, 42% of Hispanics are age 18 and 34. 57% disagree that they've benefited from the free market, right? The other groups, a majority agree. 35 plus, all agree. Now, it's a slim majority, but it's still a majority. So it's really that younger cohort that is having a little trouble acknowledging or seeing themselves as benefiting from the free market. Pretty big partisan split here. 85% of base Republicans agree they've benefited. 68% from soft Republicans. That number was a little bit higher back in 2025. Independents almost exactly match the electorate as a whole. Soft Dems at 43, base Democrats at 35% agree. Now, notably, one thing that's notable is that if I'd ask the same question among the general electorate, you would see lower degree of agreement among Democrats. So Hispanic Democrats more open to the free market than Democrats nationally. And then we see the trends, right? Look at the flip among voters age 18 to 34. 65% agree, 35% agree back in April 2025. Now it's 57-43. Still some slippage among 35 to 44, right? So what this is happening is when you've got 59% of people saying the economy is getting worse, they see it as a free market economy, so you're going to see those numbers slide a little bit. Another interesting trend is we don't see as much concern about socialism as we did back in 2023 and 2024. 2024, 58% were concerned, 54%, or only 46% concerned now, 54% not concerned. Some of that is because who's in the White House, right? With Donald Trump in the White House, there's not as much of a concern about the country drifting towards socialism. Now, what I like to point out is that you still have a lot of Democratic candidates who are, if not coming out and being like outwardly, I'm a socialist, who are very much embracing socialist type policies. So I do think this is something that you can raise the level of concern with an effective campaign, saying like, hey, you need to acknowledge really what these Democrats are saying they want to do. Getting into the American dream. So we mentioned specifically approaching 250 years of independence. Does the United States represent freedom and opportunity for you and your family today? Split down the middle, right? 50% agree, 50% disagree. And here we see a very, very significant partisan split. Among base Republicans, 94% agree. Soft Republicans, 79%. So it's still a very sizable majority there. Independents split, 45% agree, 55% disagree. Soft Democrats and base Democrats not seeing it as much. I would say two things at this. This also is affected a little bit by who is in the White House, but not overwhelmingly so. Even when Biden was in the White House, we did not see as high of agreement among Democrats as we did with Republicans. 9 out of 10, American dream is harder to achieve today than it was for previous generations. That's something that's consistent, not just with Hispanics, but with voters overall. But here's some encouraging data, right? Hard work is still the most important factor in achieving success in America. 63% agree. Opportunities in America are still available to those who are willing to work for them. 66% agree. American dream is closely tied to values like family, faith, and personal responsibility. 65% agree with that. So there is still very much a belief in the importance of hard work and that hard work can be a driver to success. Believe in the American dream, 71% in 2024, 64% now. So it trends down. But again, if we ask this question of the electorate overall, you would see an even lower number. So there is still more belief in the American dream, more belief in America being a country of freedom and opportunity with Hispanic voters than with the national electorate. Education freedom. To me, this is some of the most exciting data in the survey. Support or oppose school choice, and we get specific about what school choice means. Allows parents to send their children to any public charter or private school and allows state funding to follow that student. 73% support. And then look at the numbers by party, right? 88% among base Republicans, 62% among base Democrats. You don't see too many issues where you've got clear majority support among both base Dems and base Republicans. So there's no doubt school choice is a bipartisan issue among Hispanics. And why is that? Let me call your attention to the data at the bottom of the right. Many public school systems in America are failing our children by letting them fall behind. 80% of Hispanics agree with that statement. Well, if you agree with that statement, guess what? You're going to be very much open to school choice. Worry that public schools are not focused on teaching the basics like reading, writing, and arithmetic. 69% agree with that statement. If you agree with that statement, of course, you're going to be open to school choice. If I could afford to move my kids out of the public school system, I would. 67% agree with that statement. So again, it's very clear why there is so much support for school choice. And another thing I want to point out, since it is directly tied to school choice, but there should be more technical, educational, and professional development programs offered in our public high schools. 97% agree, 3% disagree. This consistently, no matter what audience I'm polling, no matter what state I am polling in, this polls off the charts. Every candidate should have this as part of their policy speech, right? When you are talking about education, you should be talking about adding more what we call CTE, technical education, professional development programs. It is incredibly popular. Getting into healthcare. So healthcare costs rising, pretty clear tick up. 75% agree their healthcare costs were rising in 2023. We've gone 76, 78, 83. So a clear sense that those are increasing. But again, almost all costs are seen as increasing right now. Well, we've got a host of messages on healthcare to what can we do about healthcare that really resonate. Need to make reforms to the federal healthcare program that meets the needs for Americans now and in the future. 96% agree, 4% disagree. Congress should focus on eliminating waste, fraud, and abuse in federal healthcare programs. 90% agree. Healthcare companies game the healthcare system to squeeze more money out of federal taxpayers. 93% agree. It should be a more personalized approach to healthcare that gives people flexibility in how they receive healthcare. 93% agree. When I think about this, I think a lot about telehealth, right? Voters are big fans of telehealth appointments because it's just incredibly more convenient. Concerns about Social Security, Medicare, worried about the financial health of our country's social programs, such as Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. 91% agree with that statement. Social programs such as Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are being taken advantage of. Congress should make sure the programs serve who it was intended to serve. 64% agree. Medicaid should be a temporary safe net when serving to able-bodied adults. 67% agree. So there is a lot of really effective healthcare messaging that clearly resonates with Hispanic voters. Immigration. 6 in 10 strongly disapprove of the way Trump is handling the immigration situation. There's clear frustration among Hispanics with the president on immigration, and we've seen some slippage with his numbers nationally on immigration as well. Why is that? The perception among Hispanics is that the president is deporting too many people, and there should be more of a focus on deporting those with criminal records, right? Even among base Republicans, 47% agree, 53% disagree with that statement, but then soft Republicans, 73%, 84% among independents. So that's where voters are, right? They want the focus to be on criminal, felony, violent, illegal immigrants.
And we've seen that a tick up in that. We even saw in 2025, so early in the president's term, 79% agreed that they wanted the focus to be on deporting people who have committed serious crimes. That's up to 83% now. There's also a clear appetite for some immigration reforms. More needs to be done to create legal pathways to immigration for those who wish to immigrate to the country legally. 90% agree with that. Legal immigration system is broken. 88%. Provide DACA recipients a pathway to citizenship. 85%. Make it easier for immigrants with professional degrees for their countries of origin to carry out their careers in the United States. 84%. So clear, widespread agreement on those types of immigration reforms. Energy security. I mentioned this at the outset. So there's widespread agreement that the federal government makes it harder for our country to produce more energy in America. 75% agree. And what do they want? They want the country to produce more of its own gas and oil. 80%. Some of this is an education issue, right? America has significantly boosted their energy production, but voters aren't necessarily connecting that. They still think we get a lot of our energy from overseas. But even so, there's still very much an appetite for more domestic gas and oil production. There's also support for nuclear energy. 66% would approve of more investments in nuclear energy in this country. And then last slide, military. This is some of the more challenging data. Approve or disapprove of military actions to kill drug lords in Mexico, 56%, so a majority there. Some of that, we were talking earlier, some of that is because guess what? The majority of the Hispanic population is from Mexico, right? That's where we see the largest group, so they're going to be most approving of that. Tougher numbers, recent military actions in Venezuela, 34%. Approve or disapprove of military action to get rid of the communist government in Cuba, 37%. And then the war in Iran, 21% approve, 79% disapprove. One thing I will point out is that, for example, in the Cuba and Venezuela numbers, when you look at those numbers in Florida, they look a little bit differently, right? So there is some regional break to this data, but Hispanics overall, not as excited about potential military action or previous military action in Venezuela, and the numbers in the war in Iran are challenging too. And I think you're seeing that from the president with his eagerness to get to a ceasefire there. So with that, I hope I was as concise as Sandra wanted me to be. I think I was pretty close. But
You did great.
It's tough to keep people, like polling presentation or open bar is challenging.
Well, thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
What I also wanted to point out is that this is a kind of brief summary of what's included in this booklet. So if you haven't grabbed one, they're at the front. There's two different books there. One is the full summary of all of our polling. The other book is specifically on energy. So with that, now let me introduce Wadi. Wadi is our communications director and also the spokesman for the LIBRE Institute. He's going to be being part of the panel. We're going to ask a few questions about the what we just went through, and also what does this mean for the Latino community. So I'm going to start with you, Wadi. So Hispanic voters are increasingly independent. They're not anchored to either political party. So what does this moment mean for how leaders should engage with this community, and what must be done to earn their trust?
Yeah. I'll start by saying that I thought Jim was going to give the presentation in Spanish. So I was slightly disappointed there, Jim, but, you know, we'll take it. That was good. The trust factor...
Lo siento.
Lo siento. There we go. We'll keep it in English. For Jim. I think the panel, or to your question, and what the polling reveals is that in this group of Latinos being independent, there is an appetite for solutions. Being independent means that you're kind of open-minded to one group or the other. It also can mean that you're very distrusting to both groups, which means that you're going to have part of the population that's voting against certain issues or that's voting against a certain party. It means you have another population that's just open. One year they could vote for the Democrat because they feel that message resonated to the issues that they were dealing with. And then the next year, they could vote for the Republican because that Republican talked to the issues that they had. So when I'm looking at the polling and I'm thinking, how do I apply this strategy? It means that when I'm showing up, number one, you got to show up, right? But when I'm showing up with a message that is nuanced. I love how Jim was talking about that the economy was number one. And I think most polling year after year, the economy is almost number one. But in past years, it's on the unemployment side, right? People want more job opportunities, or they want to be able to see just salaries increasing. This data shows us that it's very specific on things being too high priced, right? The affordability aspect to it. So I think Latinos, similar to all Americans, are asking, hey, are you aware of what the problem is? Like when you're showing up, are you highlighting the problem, but then are you elevating the solution? It's great if you can do both, because when you elevate the solution, people are like, okay, that resonates with me. Sorry, the problem. If you highlight the problem, people will say this person resonates with what I'm going through. They're understanding the struggle to make ends meet, to pay for groceries, to pay for rent. But then I can trust you, or I can count on you because you have a solution to the problem that I'm facing. So I think trust is earned by, yes, showing up, but having a nuance on what the solution is. The sort of this era of just talking points with independence, I think, doesn't go far enough, right? There's a skeptical aspect of where they're coming from, and just saying that, sort of trashing the other side or just coming against the other side, I think it's not good enough. I think that's where Democrats right now are sort of failing. Their strategy, in my opinion, is just Trump isn't good. And I asked them, okay, what's their solution? I don't think they have that. So I think Republicans and conservatives need to elevate what those conservative policies are. It's a sophisticated electorate that will pay attention.
Well, your answer kind of leads me to the next question, which is related to the economy. We saw that was the number one priority for the Latino community. So, Sandra, given that 45% of Hispanic voters identify the economy as their top concern, and most rated as poor, how should leaders rethink their approach to economic policy? What should they do different?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to regurgitate everything Jim and Wadi have already covered, but there's a few key pieces here. One, Hispanics care about the same issues as every other American. We're not like this secret mythical community. I don't know. So everyone's struggling with affordability right now. That is at the top of the mind for most Hispanics. And I think they're looking for elected officials, members, legislators who are going to remove burdensome regulations. There are over 5 million Hispanic-owned businesses in the country, right? So Hispanics are entrepreneurial. They're, want to achieve their version of the American dream. They're looking at who's going to unleash American energy and bring some of these prices down, right? And make it really competitive here. So I think, and last, so, when you're looking at policy and all of this, last is also, I think, emphasizing the good policy that a lot of members have worked on. So, for example, the Working Families Tax Cut, I always mess up the whole name, but that is a great bill that I feel like we worked on and just moved on, and reminding Hispanics that there are a lot of good things in that bill that will benefit them. So overall, I would say top two, removing burdensome regulation and also making sure you're showing up in the community and talking about these things.
Thank you. Jim, there was a question, or we saw a slide about the decline in the free market. So that was the decline mostly was with younger Hispanics. So how do you interpret that shift, and what do you think that says about how opportunity is being perceived or experienced today?
The important thing to keep in mind is that when there's economic pessimism, it's going to extend to anything related to the economy, right? So if you say the economy is getting worse, you're less likely to say, oh yeah, but I'm really benefiting from the free market economy, right? But the other thing that we see is there's still very much a belief in it. And I think that it's incumbent upon elected officials and organizations like LIBRE to, one, remind people what a free market looks like, and then two, talk about how burdensome regulations impede a free market. I think one thing that is a really easy thing to point to people is in every neighborhood, right? Whether it's in Alexandria where I live, or in Laredo, Texas, or in Tampa, Florida, or wherever it may be, there's these construction projects that just seem like they're taking forever. And a really easy thing for a candidate to do is to just point to that and be like, you know why that's taking forever? It's because they have to go through so many hurdles to get a whole host of different things approved. And if we remove those hurdles, guess what? We'll get it built faster. And guess what? If we get housing built faster, the price of housing will come down. Because right now, one of the reasons that the cost of housing is so much is because demand is outstripping supply. And the easiest way to bring housing costs down is to increase that supply.
Great. So with that, we're going to open it up to Q&A. So
You see, we left it short and sweet for everyone.
that's right. Can you click on that next?
And we'll be around after if anyone has additional questions. The full poll results are published online as well.
So let me check on the. I think we have.
That's just from Helter, but yes.
So the slide I thought was interesting is on the socialism question. Is there anything you can extrapolate in terms of how successful President Trump was in 2024, and then looking at some of the key Senate states in 2026 based on that lack of concern about rising socialism?
I think it's incumbent upon Republican candidates to remind voters that even these innocuous seeming Democrats, right, are ultimately going to be going to Washington and they're going to be towing the party line, and that what the party line is, I don't know if it's fully socialism, but it's certainly bigger government, more government control, right? You know, you take a candidate like Roy Cooper in North Carolina, he's going to try to be Southern gentleman, Roy Cooper, I was your governor, et cetera, et cetera. Well, guess what? Being a senator is a lot different than being a governor. And when he goes to the Senate, he's going to vote with Chuck Schumer, and he's going to vote with Bernie Sanders, and he's going to vote with Elizabeth Warren. That's just the reality of the situation. And so I do think it is important to remind voters that just because we have a Republican in the White House does not mean that the Democrats are not arguably even going down further down the path of socialism, right? You know, if you national polling, who's one of the most popular Democrats in the country right now? Like Mayor Mamdani, an avowed socialist, right? And there's going to be candidates up and down the ballot who have at least kind of walked up very slowly to embracing some socialist ideals. And I think it's our job to, as you know, campaign operatives, to have candidates who point that out.
There's a question here in the front.
So what do we attribute the rise in socialism?
That's a good question. I think it is people are looking for they are looking for more help, right? And so when you give people, you know, things like Medicaid for all and things like that, and things like that, they're in with that economic anxiety. One thing that socialism does is it addresses that economic anxiety. It's like, well, you're not going to have to worry about it quite as much as you used to, because we're going to make sure everybody's okay. We're going to make sure that everybody has health care and everybody has a house and everybody can get a job. And it's like, oh, I have economic anxiety. Like, that sounds pretty good. You know, if the economy was booming and we were in like a, you know, almost 2002 or 3 type environment, then maybe we wouldn't see the embrace of socialism as much as we are right now. But it does have an appeal to people when they are really pessimistic, I think.
Well, one of my favorite quote I like, it says, "In the absence of good ideas, bad ideas become relevant." And I think on the Democrat side specifically, their sort of more moderate leadership has failed to bring what those traditional sort of liberal ideas were to the forefront. So it's given a lot of space to the far left, the more progressive, the more socialist leaning or socialist part of that party, to elevate a lot of solutions. Look at New York, right? The lineup, you had Cuomo, who already, you know, was he kicked out as governor or had to resign as governor? Like, that was
He
really
had baggage.
Yeah, he had a lot of baggage. Like, their lineup wasn't there. So again, in the absence of those good ideas, bad ideas become relevant. But I do agree as well. It's both sort of, I think, the fault of Democrats themselves allowing that party to take over, and then I think it's just the appetite of when things are going wrong, people are listening or open to various ideas.
We have another
2
question in the back
here.
So my question is, you talked about the pessimism, but do you see people like racing back to Democrats, or were the Latino audience?
No, but I'll let Jim answer this one on our.
Yeah, I think that is something really interesting that we're seeing in polling, is that there is still a lot of resistance to embracing Democratic politicians, right? It is, and I think one big challenge they're going to have is some of their standard bearers in terms of who's going to be on the ballot, right? It's really easy to say, hey, I'm frustrated with President Trump. It's a little harder to say, I'm so frustrated with President Trump, I'm going to vote for someone like James Tallarico for Senate in Texas. You know, that's a pretty big leap, right? And I think that is something that Republicans have the potential to benefit from. Same thing that Democrats were able to benefit from in 2022, right? So a lot of these similar numbers for President Biden, but there were some candidates on the ballot for Republicans who voters just couldn't bring themselves to vote for. And I think that's one big thing we have going for us in 2026 is the lineup of Democratic candidates.
I have a question on H.R. 1, which is the only legislative vehicle we passed. We see in the general population polling-wise that most Americans are not aware of the tax cuts, whether even the businesses. To the degree to which they do realize there were some breaks, they actually, our latest poll showed that they think it's their accountant that got it. So what are you seeing in this particular community? Is it similar? Is it worse? And what do you suggest we do to educate?
It is so challenging to get voters to understand when they got a tax cut. It is really, really hard because some of it is they're not doing their own taxes. Some of it is they may have gotten a tax cut, but they made more money that year, or they sold a house that year, and so they attribute it to that or things like that. It is a big challenge. I do think the nice thing is about HR1 is that you can point to things that are very specific, and you can have real people talk about it, right? Like if you work a lot of overtime, you certainly saw the impact on no taxes and overtime. If you're a tipped employee, you certainly saw that impact. So the more we can hammer things like that home, and also remind people that the vast majority of Americans did get a tax cut, wasn't just tips employees, it wasn't just people who work overtime. I think that's helpful too, because sometimes we can go too far down that line of, hey, no tax on tips, no tax on overtime. For a majority of Americans, they're like, okay, great, but it didn't benefit me. But it's like, oh no, you benefited too, and here's why.
I do see one question online. So this is addressed to our LIBRE staff. So this relates to the American dream. So the belief in the American dream remains strong, but confidence in achieving the American dream is declining. So how can organizations like the LIBRE Institute help restore that sense of possibility?
Yeah, I'm happy to go. Well, I think having the conversation, and what I mean by the conversation is, one, let's make sure that even though an environment where we understand affordability is top of mind because things are expensive, we can still have a conversation of how we as a community can position ourselves to overcome barriers, right? I think Latinos come to the United States, and those who are sons and daughters of immigrants, grandchildren, with this belief that it's not, American dream isn't something that's just given to you. I mean, you have conversations with our community. You even look at polling. We want to earn it. So the conversation is like, okay, our parents face certain barriers, right? Maybe it was the language barrier. Maybe it was the not having a degree barrier. And then maybe those aren't the barriers that we're facing. Maybe we know the language. Maybe we graduated here. And our barriers is the affordability one. So I do think there's something about a community, the resilience part that you talked about, that we could step into. But then as part of that resilience is, yes, those are internal barriers. Those are barriers that as a community that we can come together and overcome. But let's also have a conversation on the advocacy part. How do we advocate for those right policies that we know will help, all boats rise? I forget if it was Milt Friedman who said, I forgot who was the president, but the whole famous quote, right? A economic wave that raises all boats. So I think it's a conversation of an internal, how do we remove those internal barriers? But then also, how do we as a community, as a country, come together for policies that we know are going to benefit all of us?
Thank you. As we come to a close, I would like to ask one more question. So if there is one thing that you want the audience to remember, what is it?
There's so much. For me, like my takeaway, looking at the data, we didn't cover all of it, is one, economy is the number one issue. And for those of you with members, with elections, my takeaway is, you all have a very short runway to help turn things around with the economy. And then the second takeaway is Hispanics are anchored by either political party. If you're familiar with the gains most conservatives made in 2024, those essentially have been eroded. But to Jim's earlier point, it doesn't mean these folks are now going to vote for the first Democrat, but they're going to vote for whoever brings forth the right policy solution. So those are my personal high-level takeaways.
I'll give you my personal one. Although the number dropped, I love the American dream question because, Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, we're still higher than other demographics. And I think that's such a beautiful thing that we as Latinos, we genuinely believe in this country. We believe in that American dream. So when we look at around, we can look at, wow, Latinos are in it, right? I mean, we love it so much. I was talking with a couple of friends. The World Cup's coming up. Many of us, we grew up maybe with our parents watching sort of our parents' team compete in the World Cup. But then ask most of us who we're cheering for, and it's like, it's the United States, man. This is our year. We're not going to win it, but we're hoping we get far. But it's that belief in the American dream. And when you wake up and you still believe it, it puts a little bit more swag in your step when you're going to work, when you're trying to buy that home, when you're trying to be an entrepreneur. So although the number dropped, I still love that we're really up there.
Yeah, and I would like to add to that we believe in the American dream, not just for us, but for the next generation. That's something that I took away also from the results. So, Jim, what would be that one thing that you would like people to remember?
I would say two things, classic pollster. The first is that, yes, there is still economic pessimism, but there is also still very much belief in freedom and opportunity. So connect the two, right? The best way that we can get the economy going again is by increasing freedoms and opportunity. And then the other thing that I would say to folks is that one question we've asked on previous surveys I think is really instructive is when you talk about the American dream, what does that mean to you? It's an open-ended question. And what do folks think it means? What is the number one response every single time we ask that question? Owning a home. So when you talk about the American dream, extend that to, and here's how we're going to make it easier for you to buy a home, right? And don't just settle for, we're going to make it easier to achieve the American dream. Well, for most people, what it means to achieve the American dream is owning a home here in America. So make that connection. That's what Wadi was talking about at the outset, right? Don't just say this, it's yes and. And here's how we're going to do it.
Well, thank you. So I would like to thank our panelists for a great discussion, and I appreciate everyone for joining us today. So thank you.